The Japan Self-Defense Forces, or JSDF, occasionally referred to as JSF, JDF, or SDF, are the unified military forces of Japan that were established in 1954, and are controlled by the Ministry of Defense. In recent years they have been engaged in international peacekeeping operations including the UN peacekeeping. Recent tensions, particularly with North Korea, have reignited the debate over the status of the JSDF and its relation to Japanese society. New military guidelines, announced in December 2010, will direct the JSDF away from its Cold War focus on the former Soviet Union to a focus on China, especially regarding the territorial dispute over the Senkaku Islands. History. Early development deprived of any military capability after 1945. Japan had only the U.S. occupation forces and a minor domestic police force on which to rely for security. Rising Cold War tensions in Europe and Asia, coupled with leftist-inspired strikes and demonstrations in Japan, prompted some conservative leaders to question the unilateral renunciation of all military capabilities. These sentiments were intensified in 1950 as occupation troops began to be moved to the Korean War theater. This left Japan virtually defenseless and vulnerable, and very much aware of the need to enter into a mutual defense relationship with the United States to guarantee the nation's external security. Encouraged by the American occupation authorities, the Japanese government in July 1950 authorized the establishment of a national police reserve, consisting of 75,000 men equipped with light infantry weapons. Under the terms of the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan, United States forces stationed in Japan were to deal with external aggression against Japan, while Japanese forces, both ground and maritime, would deal with internal threats and natural disasters. Accordingly, in mid-1952, the National Police Reserve was expanded to 110,000 men and named the National Safety Forces. The Coastal Safety Force, which had been organized in 1950 as a waterborne counterpart to the National Police Reserve, was transferred with it to the National Safety Agency to constitute an embryonic navy. On July 1, 1954, the National Security Board was reorganized as the Defense Agency, and the National Security Force was reorganized afterwards as the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force and the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, with General Keizo Hayashi appointed as the first chairman of Joint Staff Council, professional head of the three branches. The enabling legislation for this was the 1954 Self-Defense Forces Act. Although possession of nuclear weapons is not explicitly forbidden in the Constitution, Japan, as the only nation to have experienced the devastation of nuclear attacks, expressed early its abhorrence of nuclear arms and its determination never to acquire them. The Atomic Energy Basic Law of 1956 limits research, development, and utilization of nuclear power to peaceful uses only, and beginning in 1956, national policy has embodied three non-nuclear principles, forbidding the nation to possess or manufacture nuclear weapons or to allow them to be introduced into its territories. In 1976, Japan ratified the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and reiterated its intention never to develop, use, or allow the transportation of nuclear weapons through its territory. Nonetheless, because of its generally high technology level and large number of operating nuclear power plants, Japan is generally considered to be nuclear capable, i.e., it could develop a usable weapon in a short period of time if the political situation changed significantly. On June 8, 2006, the Cabinet of Japan endorsed a bill elevating the Defense Agency under the Cabinet Office to full-fledged established cabinet-level Ministry of Defense. This was passed by the Diet in December 2006. The trauma of the last war had produced strong pacifist sentiments among the nation. In addition, under Article 9 of the United States' written 1947 Constitution, Japan forever renounces war as an instrument for settling international disputes and declares that Japan will never again maintain land, sea, or air forces or other war potential. Later cabinets interpreted these provisions as not denying the nation the inherent right to self-defense and, with the encouragement of the United States, developed the SDF step-by-step. Anti-militarist public opinion, however, remained a force to be reckoned with on any defense-related issue. The constitutional legitimacy of the SDF was challenged well into the 1970s, and even in the 1980s. The government acted warily on defense matters lest residual anti-militarism be aggravated and a backlash result. Recent developments. According to an article in Pravda, the Russian political publication, on May 30, 2013, the Council of National Defense of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party approved a draft proposal for the full-scale rearmament of the country. Quote, "This was said to include the renaming of the Japan Self-Defense Forces into that of the Full Army for National Defense." Ex-ministers of the LDP, Shigeru Ishiba and Gen Nakatani, were identified as the prime movers behind the proposed large-scale rearmament of Japan. They presented a draft reform of the rearmament that was approved and sent to the government for consideration. Shigeru Ishiba called the current restrictions imposed after the Second World War on the size of the Japanese armed forces as long out of date. In the same article, Valery Kostanov, director of the Center for the Japanese Studies at the Institute of the Far East, was quoted as saying he believes that Japanese offensive weapons could be deployed in any direction. Of course, first of all, Japanese weapons would be directed against the DPRK, and then China. Japanese missile defense system is ramping up its power due to the increasing missile and nuclear forces in China. Either way, the country will continue to spend billions of dollars on the military industry. According to Japanese political analysts and politicians, it is primarily due to the situation on the Korean peninsula and growth of China's military. These two factors are considered a threat by Japan, and therefore the country will actively rearm. In September 2015, the Japanese Diet enacted a series of laws that allows them to defend other allies in case of war being declared upon them, including that the self-defense forces may provide material support to allies engaged in combat internationally. The justification is that by not defending, supporting an ally, it would weaken alliances and endanger Japan. Structure. The Prime Minister is the Commander-in-Chief of the Japan Self-Defense Forces. Military authority runs from the Prime Minister to the Cabinet-level Minister of Defense of the Japanese Ministry of Defense. The Prime Minister and Minister of Defense are advised by the Chief of Staff, Joint Staff, who heads the Joint Staff. The Joint Staff includes a senior enlisted advisor to the Chief of Staff, Joint Staff, the Vice Chief of Staff, Joint Staff, an administrative Vice Chief of Staff, as well as numerous departments and special staffs. Each service branch is headed by the respective Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of Staff of the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, and the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. The Chief of Staff, Joint Staff, a 4-star Admiral or General, is the highest-ranking military officer in the Japan Self-Defense Forces, and is the head of the operational authority over the Japan Self-Defense Forces, executing orders of the Minister of Defense with directions from the Prime Minister. The Chief of Staff, Joint Staff supervises the service branch's operations and would assume command in the event spent over war, but his air powers are limited to policy formation and defense coordination during peacetime. The chain of operational authority runs from the Chief of Staff, Joint Staff to the commanders of the several operational commands. Each service branch's chiefs of staff have administrative control over their own services. Military branches: Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, Japan Air Self-Defense Force. Military units: 5 armies, 5 maritime districts, 3 air defense forces. Defense policy. The 21st century is witnessing a rapid change in global power balance along with globalization. The security environment around Japan has become increasingly severe, as represented by nuclear and missile development by North Korea. Transnational threats grounded on technological progress, including international terrorism and cyber attacks, are also increasing the significance. In the current world, no nation can maintain its own peace and security alone. Japan, including its self-defense forces, has contributed to the maximum extent possible to the efforts to maintain and restore international peace and security, such as UN peacekeeping operations. Building on the ongoing efforts as a peaceful state, the government of Japan has been making various efforts on its security policy, which include the establishment of the National Security Council, the adoption of the National Security Strategy, and the National Defense Program guidelines. These efforts are made based on the belief that Japan, as a proactive contributor to peace, needs to contribute more actively to the peace and stability of the region and the international community, while coordinating with other countries, including its ally, the United States. National Security Council. On December 4, 2013, the National Security Council was established, with the aim of establishing a forum which will undertake strategic discussions under the Prime Minister on a regular basis and as necessary on various national security issues and exercising a strong political leadership. National Security Strategy. On December 17, 2013, National Security Strategy was adopted by Cabinet decision. NSS sets the basic orientation of diplomatic and defense policies related to national security. NSS presents the content of the policy of proactive contribution to peace in a concrete manner and promotes better understanding of Japan's national security policy. Budget. In 1976, then Prime Minister Miki Takeo announced defense spending should be maintained within 1% of Japan's gross domestic product, a ceiling that was observed until 1986. As of 2005, Japan's military budget was maintained at about 3% of the national budget. About half is spent on personnel costs, while the rest is for weapons programs, maintenance and operating costs. As of 2014, Japan is in the list of top 10 largest defense budgets in the world by expenditure, spending about 1% of GDP. Discussions. Due to Article 9, self-defense forces cannot act according to international law. While armies around the world adopt the negative list approach, self-defense forces must adopt the positive list approach. Anti-ballistic missile deployment. After the North Korean KWANGMYONGSONG-1 satellite launching in August 1998, which some regarded as a ballistic missile test, the Japanese government decided to participate in the American anti-ballistic missile defense program. In August 1999, Japan, Germany and the U.S. government signed a Memorandum of Understanding of Joint Research and Development on the Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense System. In 2003, the Japanese government decided to deploy 2 types of ABM system air defense vehicles sea-based Aegis and land-based PAC-3 ABM. The 4 Kongo-class Aegis destroyers of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force were modified to accommodate the ABM operational capability. On December 17, 2007, JDS Congo successfully shot down a mock ballistic missile by its EDM-3 Block IA off the coast of Hawaii. The first PAC-3 shooting test by the Japan Air Self-Defense Force was carried out in New Mexico on September 17, 2008. PAC-3 units are deployed in 6 bases near metropolises, including Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Sapporo, Misawa, and Okinawa. Japan participates in the co-research and development of 4 Aegis components with the U.S., the nose cone, the infrared seeker, the kinetic warhead, and the second-stage rocket motor. Unarmed combat system. SDF soldiers are trained in the military self-defense art of Toshukaku-to, developed in 1952 by Major Chiba Sansu from a synthesis of jujutsu, karate, aikijujutsu, boxing and wrestling. The techniques of Toshukaku-to are simplified and direct to allow for their application whilst in combat dress and carrying field kit. There is an emphasis on the rapid transmission of maximum force in strikes, and for this reason Toshukaku-to eschews the fully rotated punches and instep kicks of most karate forms in favor of vertical thrust punches and straight heel kicks. Missions and deployments. The outer outline specified quotas of personnel and equipment for each force that were deemed necessary to meet its tasks. Particular elements of each force's mission were also identified. The JSDF was to defend against ground invasion and threats to internal security, be able to deploy to any part of the nation, and protect the bases of all 3 services of the self-defense forces. The MSDF was to meet invasion by sea, sweep mines, patrol and survey the surrounding waters, and guard and defend coastal waters, ports, bays, and major straits. The ASDF was to render aircraft and missile interceptor capability, provide support fighter units for maritime and ground operations, supply air reconnaissance and air transport for all forces, and maintain airborne and stationary early warning units. The SDF disaster relief role is defined in Article 83 of the Self-Defense Forces Law of 1954, requiring units to respond to calls for assistance from prefectural governors to aid in firefighting, earthquake disasters, searches for missing persons, rescues, and reinforcement of embankments and levees in the event of flooding. The SDF has not been used in police actions, nor is it likely to be assigned any internal security tasks in the future. In late June, early July 2014, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his cabinet agreed to lift the long-term ban in engaging Japanese troops abroad since the end of the Second World War, in a bid to strengthen the Japanese situation amid an ever-growing Chinese military aggression and North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Japan had adhered to the pacifist Article 9 of the Constitution, but would revise and might reinterpret it in order for this to take effect. Peacekeeping. In June 1992, the National Diet passed a UN peacekeeping cooperation law which permitted the SDF to participate in UN medical, refugee repatriation, logistical support, infrastructural reconstruction, election monitoring, and policing operations under strictly limited conditions. The non-combatant participation of the SDF in the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia in conjunction with Japanese diplomatic efforts, contributed to the successful implementation of the 1991 Paris Peace Accords for Cambodia. In May 1993, the SDF deployed 53 peacekeepers to Mozambique to participate in the United Nations operation in Mozambique. In 2004, the Japanese government ordered a deployment of troops to Iraq at the behest of the United States. A contingent of the Japan Self-Defense Forces was sent in order to assist the U.S.-led reconstruction of Iraq. This controversial deployment marked a significant turning point in Japan's history, as it is the first time since the end of World War II that Japan sent troops abroad except for a few minor UN peacekeeping deployments. Public opinion regarding this deployment was sharply divided, especially given that Japan's military is constitutionally structured as solely a self-defense force, and operating in Iraq seemed at best tenuously connected to that mission. The Koizumi administration, however, decided to send troops to respond to a request from the U.S., even though they deployed with the weapons, because of constitutional restraints. The troops were protected by Japanese Special Forces troops and Australian units. The Japanese soldiers were there purely for humanitarian and reconstruction work, and were prohibited from opening fire on the Iraqi insurgents unless they were fired on first. Japanese forces withdrew from Iraq in 2006. In 2005, Japan briefly deployed a humanitarian mission to Indonesia following the tsunami. 6 Japan Ground Self-Defense Force officers were deployed to Nepal as part of a UN-mandated peacekeeping mission to enforce a ceasefire between government forces and communist rebels. As required by Article 9 regulations, they were not to engage in any potential combat operations. Japan provided logistics units for the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force Zone, which supervises the buffer zone in the Golan Heights, monitors Israeli and Syrian military activities, and assists local civilians. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force deployed a force off the coast of Somalia to protect Japanese ships from Somali pirates. The force consists of 2 destroyers, patrol helicopters, speedboats, 8 officers of the Japan Coast Guard to collect criminal evidence and handle piracy suspects, a force of commandos from the elite Special Boarding Unit, and P-3 Orion patrol aircraft in the Gulf of Aden. On 19 June 2009, the Japanese Parliament finally passed an anti-piracy bill, which allows the force to protect non-Japanese vessels. In May 2010, Japan announced it intended to build a permanent naval base in Djibouti to provide security for Japanese ships against Somali pirates. Construction of the JSDF counter-piracy facility in Djibouti commenced in July 2010, completed in June 2011 and opened on 1 July 2011. Initially, the base was to house approximately 170 JSDF personnel and include administrative, housing, medical, kitchen, dining, and recreational facilities, as well as an aircraft maintenance hangar and parking apron. The base now houses approximately 200 personnel and 2 P-3C aircraft. In the aftermath of an earthquake in Haiti, Japan deployed a contingent of troops, including engineers with bulldozers and heavy machinery, to assist the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti. Their duties were peacekeeping, removal of rubble, and the reconstruction of roads and buildings. In a recent press release, Chief Cabinet Secretary Nobutaka Makimura had stated that discussions with Defense Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Foreign Minister Masahiko Komura were taking place regarding the possibility of creating a permanent law for JSDF forces to be deployed in peacekeeping missions outside Japan. The adoption of a permanent peacekeeping law has been considered by the government, according to the Mainichi Daily News. Uniforms, ranks, and insignia, the arm of service to which members of the ground command force are attached is indicated by branch insignia and piping of distinctive colors. For infantry, red; artillery, yellow; armor, orange; engineers, violet; ordnance, light green; medical, green; army aviation, light blue; signals, blue; quartermaster, brown; transportation, dark violet; airborne, white; and others, dark blue. The cap badge insignia of the JSDF is a sakura cherry blossom bordered with 2 ivy branches underneath, and a single chevron centered on the bottom between the bases of the branches. The MSDF cap badge insignia consists of a valve anchor underneath a cherry blossom bordered on the sides and bottom by ivy vines, and the ASDF cap badge insignia features a heraldic eagle under which is a star and crescent, which is bordered underneath with stylized wings. There are 9 officer ranks in the active SDF, along with a warrant officer rank, 5 NCO ranks, and 3 enlisted ranks. The highest NCO rank, First Sergeant, was established in 1980 to provide more promotion opportunities and shorter terms of service as Sergeant First Class, Chief Petty Officer, or Master Sergeant. Under the earlier system, the average NCO was promoted only twice in approximately 30 years of service and remained at the top rank for almost 10 years.